Stepmother stole my father's $8 million business. Here's how I took it back for $50,000. I never thought I would stand at my father's grave and feel nothing but cold rage. The October wind cut through the cemetery like a knife, whipping dead leaves against the polished granite headstone. I stood about 15 feet back from a main group of mourners, hands shoved deep in my jacket pockets, watching the whole performance unfold. My stepmother Linda was front and center, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than the flowers surrounding the casket. My stepbrother Tyler stood next to her, checking his Apple Watch every 30 seconds like he had somewhere more important to be. I guess he did. They both did. The priest droned on about eternal rest and divine mercy, but I was not listening to him. I was listening to the sound of Linda's perfume overpowering everything else in that cemetery. Chanel No. 5. The expensive stuff. It killed the smell of autumn leaves and damp earth, replacing it with something artificial and cloying. That pretty much summed up everything Linda had brought into my father's life after my real mom died. Money, appearances, plastic smiles. My father had been a craftsman, a real one. He built old Smoky barbecue sauce from nothing, starting in our garage when I was 7 years old. I remember the smell of smoked peppers and vinegar filling our house, my mother laughing as she helped him bottle the first batch by hand. He had a gift for flavor that you could not teach or buy. You either had it or you did not. I had it. I inherited his palate, his understanding of how ingredients marry and transform under heat and time. By the time I was 16, I was working alongside him in the lab, learning the science behind the art. Chemistry became my language. Fermentation, emulsification, pH balance. These were not just technical terms to me. They were the vocabulary of creation. By 25, I was the head of product development, chief technology officer. The business card said, but really, I was the keeper of the flame. Every batch of Old Smoky that went out the door passed through my hands first. Every formula adjustment, every quality control check, every innovation that kept us ahead of the cheap imitators flooding the market. That was me. Linda did not care about any of that. She married my father when I was 28, a full decade after my mother passed. He was 62, still handsome in that weather way that comes from years of hard work and honest living. Linda was 45, blonde, polished, and she smelled like money from day one. She brought Tyler with her, a spoiled 24-year-old with an MBA from some school I had never heard of and an attitude that made my teeth hurt. I watched them now at the graveside, and I could see Tyler glancing at his phone. Actually glancing at his phone during his stepfather's funeral. Linda noticed and put a hand on his arm, squeezing gently. A warning, not comfort. Keep up appearances, that gesture said. We are almost done here. They had been married to my father for 7 years. 7 years of Linda slowly poisoning him against me. Little comments about how I was stuck in the past, how the business needed fresh blood, how Tyler's marketing degree could take Old Smoky national. My father had started listening, started doubting his own instincts, started believing that the thing we built together needed something neither of us had. It needed, apparently, a rebrand. The service ended. People filed past the casket, dropping roses onto the polished wood. I stayed where I was, watching Linda and Tyler work the crowd like they were at a networking event. Handshakes, sympathetic nods. Linda's hand on the arm of the company's biggest distributor, leaning in close to whisper something that made him nod seriously. She was already working, already positioning. I turned and walked back to my truck without saying goodbye to anyone. Nobody would miss me. The lawyer's office was everything I expected. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, diplomas on the wall that screamed Ivy League, even though this was just a small firm in Tennessee. Charles Brennan had been my father's attorney for 30 years, and the look on his face when I walked in told me everything I needed to know. This was not going to be good. Linda and Tyler were already seated, both dressed in black that looked more fashionable than funeral. Linda's dress probably cost $2,000. Tyler wore a suit that fit him like it had been painted on, and he gave me a smirk as I took the chair farthest from them. Brennan cleared his throat and opened the folder in front of him. His hand shook slightly. The man was 70 if he was a day, and he looked like he had not slept since my father died. The will was simple, brutally simple. Linda received controlling interest in Old Smoky Barbecue Company, 60% of shares, full ownership of the brand, the facility, all intellectual property associated with the business. She also got the house, the cars, and the majority of liquid assets. Tyler received the position of Chief Executive Officer effective immediately, a salary of $250,000 per year, plus bonuses tied to company performance. He also received 20% of company shares. I received a cardboard box. Brennan actually said it like that. A cardboard box containing personal items from my laboratory workspace, and a check for $10,000, described in the will as separation compensation for my years of service to the company. Separation compensation. Like I was a mid-level employee they were laying off, not the son who built half the recipes that made Old Smoky worth 8 figures. I sat there in that leather chair, and I did not say a word. Linda was watching me with this careful expression, like she was studying a bug under glass. Tyler was not even pretending to hide his satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his ankle over his knee, and actually grinned at me. Brennan kept talking, explaining the legal framework, the provisions, the timeline for transition of assets. His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I was not really listening anymore. I was doing math in my head. 7 years of marriage. My father had changed his will 4 years ago, right after Linda suggested that Tyler join the company in a leadership role. I had opposed it, loudly. My father and I had fought about it, the only real fight we ever had. He told me I was being territorial, that I needed to accept that Linda and Tyler were family now. I told him they were vultures. He died thinking I was bitter and jealous. Maybe I was, but I was also right. The meeting ended. Brennan handed me an envelope with the check inside and told me the cardboard box was waiting for me at the facility. I could pick it up at my convenience. Linda stood, smoothed her dress, and walked out without looking at me. She had what she wanted. Tyler lingered. He waited until Brennan left the room to file paperwork. Then he turned to me with that same grin plastered across his face. He looked like a kid on Christmas morning. He told me they were implementing immediate changes to the company direction. Old Smoky needed a rebrand, needed to appeal to younger demographics, needed to modernize. The artisanal small batch approach was quaint, he said, but it did not scale. They were going to streamline production, cut costs, and maximize margins. He said I smelled like smoke in the past. Then he told me to surrender my facility access badge. Security would escort me out. I stood up slowly. Tyler was 3 inches taller than me and probably 30 pounds heavier, most of it from sitting behind a desk and eating catered lunches. But he stepped back anyway. Something in my face made him nervous. I pulled the badge from my wallet and set it on Brennan's desk. I did not throw it. I did not slam it down. I placed it carefully, precisely, the way I had placed thousands of ingredients on scales over the years. Exact measurements matter. In chemistry and in revenge, I told Tyler good luck with the streamlining. Then I walked out. The drive to facility took 20 minutes. I had made that drive 1,000 times, usually before dawn, usually with coffee going cold in the cup holder and ideas for new formulations bouncing around in my head. The building was not much to look at from the outside, a converted tobacco warehouse on the edge of town, red brick and tall windows. But inside it was cathedral. At least it had been to me. The main production floor, where the massive steel vats processed hundreds of gallons at a time. The aging room, where barrels of concentrated base sauce developed flavor over months. The laboratory, where I had spent 15 years of my life chasing perfection. All of it belonged to Linda now. Linda, who thought barbecue sauce came from a bottle at the grocery store until she married my father. Security was waiting when I pulled into the parking lot. 2 guys I had known for years, both looking uncomfortable. They escorted me to the lab like I was a criminal, standing in the doorway while I collected my box. It was not much. A framed photo of my father and me at the first major food expo where Old Smoky won gold. Some notebooks full of formula iterations. A coffee mug shaped like a chili pepper that my mom had given my dad before she died. Personal items, just like the will said. And one more thing. Sitting in the bottom of the box wrapped in an old kitchen towel, was a small glass jar, 4 ounces maybe, dark brown liquid inside, almost black. No label, nothing to indicate what was to anyone who did not know. But I knew. Stabilizing extract number 4. I had developed it 8 years ago, after months of failed experiments. Old Smoky was growing fast, and we were hitting a wall with consistency. Barbecue sauce is a living thing. Vinegar, tomato, spices, sugars. Without the right stabilizer, it separates. The solids sink. The liquids weep. The flavor profile falls apart. Every craft sauce maker faces this problem. Most solve it by adding commercial emulsifiers and gums. Xanthan. Guarantee chemicals at work, but leave a slimy mouth feel. I wanted something better. Something that enhanced flavor instead of masking it. So I built it from scratch using fermented pepper extract, enzymatically modified starches, and proprietary blend of natural acids. It took 217 attempts to get it right. When I finally perfected it, my father insisted I patent it. He said the formula was too valuable to leave unprotected. So I did. I filed for a patent under my own name, then licensed it back to Old Smoky for $1 per year. A sweetheart deal. A family deal. The kind of deal you make when you trust the people you are working with. I picked up the jar and held it up to the light, streaming through the lab windows. The liquid was thick, viscous, catching the afternoon sun like amber. Without this, Old Smoky sauce was just another regional barbecue brand that would separate in the bottle and taste like vinegar soup within 6 months. With it, we were gold medalists. We were the sauce that restaurants special order by the case. We were the brand that food bloggers called liquid umami. The patent was mine. The license had expired the day they fired me. I wrapped the jar back up carefully and placed it in the box. The security guards were getting antsy, shifting their weight and checking the time. I took one last look around the lab. The stainless steel counters were already covered in dust. Tyler probably thought this room was a waste of space that could be converted to storage. I carried my box out to the parking lot and loaded it into the bed of my pickup. The truck was 15 years old, a Ford F-150 with rust spots and a dent in the tailgate from when I backed into a loading dock. It was the opposite of Tyler's leased BMW. It was real. It worked. It lasted. I climbed into the cab and started the engine. The old V8 rumbled to life, that deep growl that only comes from actual displacement and real metal. I sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at the facility in my rearview mirror. The Old Smoky sign was still there, the hand-painted logo my father had designed 30 years ago. Soon, Tyler would replace it with something modern, something minimalist and soulless. He would hire a branding agency from Nashville or Atlanta, and they would give him a logo that looked like every other logo. Clean lines, sans serif font, probably some horrible flat designed in millennial pink and charcoal gray. They thought they had bought the machine. They thought the factory and the vats and the distribution contracts were what made Old Smoky valuable. They had no idea that the engine was sitting in a cardboard box in the back of my truck, wrapped in a kitchen towel. I put the truck in gear and rolled toward the exit. In the mirror, I watched the facility shrink behind me. The building where I had learned my craft. The building where my father and I had turned chemistry into art. The building that no longer wanted me. That was fine. They would figure it out soon enough. Probably in about 3 months, when the first batch made without stabilizing extract number 4 hit the shelves. When customers started complaining about separation. When the flavor profile went flat. When returns started flooding back from distributors. Tyler would panic. He would call in consultants. He would throw money at the problem. And eventually, someone would tell him about the patent, about the licensing agreement that expired the day he escorted me out, about the fact that the secret to Old Smoky's success was not in the building at all. I turned onto the highway and pointed the truck toward town. The afternoon sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the Tennessee hills in shades of gold and amber, the same colors as the liquid in that jar. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Probably Brennan's office, confirming receipt of documents. Or maybe one of the old-timers from production, sending condolences about my father. I did not check. I just drove. The whole world thought this was the end of something. My father was gone. I was out of the company. Linda and Tyler were in control. The story was over. They were wrong. This was not an ending. This was a setup. I reached over and patted the cardboard box on the passenger seat, feeling the solid weight of the jar inside. In the world of chemistry, you learn early that every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction. You cannot cheat thermodynamics. You cannot violate the laws of nature. You can try to force things, cut corners, substitute inferior ingredients. But eventually, reality catches up. Tyler wanted to streamline, to modernize, to maximize margins by cutting out the expensive, time-consuming processes that made old Smoky special. He was about to get a master class in what happens when you remove the foundation from a building. I rolled down the window and let the October air rush in, cold and clean and full of smoke from someone's fireplace. It smelled like autumn, like change, like the end of one thing and the beginning of another. The facility disappeared behind a line of trees. I did not look back again. There was no point. That chapter was closed. Linda and Tyler could have the building, the brand name, the illusion of ownership. I had the recipe. And more importantly, I had time. Time to watch them fail. Time to let their greed and incompetence strip away everything my father built. Time to wait for the exact right moment to step back in and take what was always mine. The engine rumbled. The road stretched out ahead. And in the box beside me, a small jar of dark liquid sat quiet and patient, holding the secret that would destroy them. They thought they had won. They had no idea the game had not even started yet. 3 months after they kicked me out, I was standing in a parking lot at 2 a.m, scrubbing burned grease off a flat-top grill with steel wool that was shredding my hands. The food truck had seemed like a good idea at the time. Use that $10,000 severance to buy a used trailer, some equipment, and enough inventory to get started. Set up in a lot behind Murphy's Bar on weekends. Sling barbecue to drunk people who would eat anything. Build from there. Simple plan. Terrible execution. The first 2 months were brutal. I worked 18-hour days and came home smelling like smoke and failure. The propane costs alone were killing me. Then there was the health permit, the business license, the liability insurance. That 10 grand evaporated faster than vinegar in a hot pan. I maxed out 2 credit cards, just keeping the thing running. There were nights I sat in my apartment, eating ramen because I had spent my last $20 on pork shoulder, wondering if Tyler had been right about me. Maybe I did smell like the past. Maybe I was just a lab guy who could not hack it in the real world. But I kept at it, because the alternative was admitting they had won. I refined the menu down to 5 items. Pulled pork, brisket, ribs, loaded fries, and 1 special that rotated weekly. Everything got my sauce. Not Old Smoky. I cannot use that name anymore. Just my sauce. The one I made in 5-gallon batches in my apartment kitchen at midnight, using the formula I had perfected years ago. The one with stabilizing extract number 4. Word spread slowly. A line cook from Murphy's tried the ribs and told his chef. The chef came by and ordered 20 pounds of brisket for a private event. Someone posted a photo on Instagram, then another. By month 3, I had regulars, people who showed up every Friday and Saturday like clockwork. The truck was not pretty. Dented aluminum sides. Hand-painted sign that said smoke and steel barbecue. But it worked. The food was good. Better than good. People started saying it. They said it tasted like Old Smoky used to taste. It was a Saturday afternoon in late January when Marcus showed up. Marcus was a regular. Big guy, construction foreman, ate like he was fueling a diesel engine. He usually ordered the 3-meat plate and ate it standing up at the counter, making appreciative noises that were borderline obscene. Today, he had a different look on his face. Concern mixed with disgust. He was carrying a plastic grocery bag. He walked up the window and set the bag on the counter, then pulled out a bottle of Old Smoky original barbecue sauce. Store-bought. The label looked different than I remembered. Cleaner, more modern. They had done the rebrand. Marcus told me he had grabbed it at the supermarket because he was grilling at home and wanted the real deal. He said he opened it and nearly gagged. He asked if I would try it because something was seriously wrong. I took the bottle. The weight was off immediately. Too light. I unscrewed the cap, and the smell hit me before I even brought it close to my nose. Chemical. Sharp. Wrong. I poured a small amount onto a plastic spoon and held it up to the light. The consistency was separated even in the bottle. I could see a thin layer of liquid at the top, darker sediment at the bottom. Classic emulsion failure. I tilted the spoon and watched how it moved. Too thick in some places. Too thin in others. No cohesion. I tasted it. The flavor hit my tongue like a slap. Liquid smoke. The cheap stuff that comes in a bottle. The kind that tastes like someone dissolved a campfire in rubbing alcohol. Underneath that was tomato paste, but it had oxidized. The acidity was all wrong. Too high, biting into my cheeks. And there was a metallic aftertaste that could only come from one thing. E150. Caramel color additive. The industrial kind used in soda. They had replaced the stabilizer. I set the spoon down and looked at Marcus. I told him they had gutted the formula, replaced the aged pepper base with liquid smoke, swapped out the natural stabilizer for modified food starch and caramel coloring, cut the aging time from 6 months to probably 6 days. This was not sauce anymore. This was brown ketchup with delusions of grandeur. Marcus looked like I had just told him his childhood dog died. He asked how they could do that, how they could take something perfect and turn it into garbage. I did not have a good answer for him. Greed, probably. Impatience. Arrogance. Tyler thinking his MBA made him smarter than chemistry. Take your pick. Marcus took the bottle back, shaking his head, and ordered his usual 3-meat plate. He said he was never buying Old Smoky again. He would just come here instead. I thanked him and got back to work. But my mind was not on the grill anymore. They had actually done it. They had killed the formula. That night, after I closed up the truck and drove home, I pulled out my phone and started searching. I wanted to see if Marcus's bottle was an isolated incident or something bigger. It was bigger. The Old Smoky Facebook page was a disaster zone. Hundreds of comments, all negative. People saying the sauce tasted like chemicals, that it separated in the bottle, that it had a weird texture. Someone posted a photo of a bottle that had exploded in their pantry. Red-brown sauce all over the shelves. The caption said it had been sealed and unopened. I knew what had happened there. Fermentation. Without the right stabilizer. The natural sugars in the tomato base were feeding bacteria. The bottles were building pressure. Some of them were literally exploding. The company's responses were corporate boilerplate. We take quality seriously. Please contact customer service. We stand behind our product. No acknowledgement of the problem. No recall. Just denial. I switched to Twitter. Same story. Food bloggers who had previously praised Old Smoky were roasting the new formula. One guy with 200,000 followers posted a side-by-side comparison with a bottle from 6 months ago. The old sauce was uniform, glossy, perfect. The new bottle looked like it was separating into layers even as he filmed. He said it tasted like the company had given up on caring. The stock price told the real story. I pulled up the trading info on my laptop. Old Smoky had gone public 3 years ago, a small regional offering. The stock had been steady around $18 per share. Now it was down to $15. A 15% drop in less than 2 months. For a company that size, that was catastrophic. That was millions in market cap just evaporating because they had decided they knew better than 3 decades of proven process. I sat back in my chair and felt something strange settle over me. It was not satisfaction exactly. It was more like vindication. The universe was confirming what I already knew. You cannot cheat chemistry. TikTok was even worse for them. The algorithm had picked up on the controversy and was feeding people videos of Old Smoky failures. Bottles foaming when opened, sauce that looked like it had separated into 3 distinct layers. One video showed a time-lapse of an open bottle sitting on a counter for 2 hours. By the end, the solids had completely settled to the bottom, and the liquid on top was almost clear. The comments were brutal. People tagging friends. making jokes, calling it old broke why. Someone had created a meme using a screenshot from the company's new TV commercial. Tyler in a suit, grinning next to a bottle of sauce, with the caption, "When your stepdad's new wife's son runs a family business." I should not have laughed. It was petty, but I laughed anyway. They had spent decades building a reputation, and they were demolishing it in weeks. All because Tyler thought he could improve on something that did not need improving. All because Linda thought profit margins mattered more than quality. All because neither of them understood that some things cannot be shortcuts. My phone rang around 10 p.m. Unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Tyler's voice came through the speaker before I could say anything. He was yelling, but there was something underneath the anger, something high-pitched and desperate. He demanded to know what I had done to the equipment before I left. He said the sauce was separating, and they could not figure out why. He accused me of sabotaging the mixing tanks or tampering with the formulas. He said their food scientists had analyzed everything and could not find the problem. I let him rant. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter while I got a beer from the fridge. His voice kept going, spiraling higher, more frantic. He said they were facing a class action lawsuit from distributors, that stores were pulling the product, that the board was demanding answers. Finally, he stopped to breathe. I asked him if he had checked the patents. Silence on the other end, long enough that I thought he had hung up. Then he asked what patents. I took a sip of beer and explained it to him like he was 5 years old. The stabilizer that kept old Smoky from separating was not some generic ingredient he could buy from a supplier. It was a proprietary compound that I had developed and patented under my own name. The company had been using it under a license agreement that cost $1 per year. The license expired when they terminated my employment. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Fast, shallow breaths. He was connecting the dots, realizing that the secret ingredient was not in the building at all, that every batch they had made in the past 3 months was defective because they were missing something they did not even know existed. He asked how much I wanted. I smiled at that. He thought this was about money. He thought he could just write a check and make the problem go away. I told him I was not interested in licensing the formula. I told him the patent was not for sale. I told him he and Linda had made their choice when they decided I smelled like smoke in the past. Then I told him to have a good night. He started yelling again. Threats this time. He would sue me for corporate espionage. He would have lawyers bury me. He would make sure I never worked in food production again. I let him finish. Then I reminded him that everything I had done was perfectly legal. The patent was filed years before they took over. The license was a standard agreement that had ended according to its own terms. If he wanted to sue someone, he should sue himself for not reading the fine print. His voice cracked when he started threatening again. He said they would figure it out. They would hire someone to reverse engineer the stabilizer. They would replace it with something else. I wished him luck with that. Chemistry was not like business. You could not fake it or bluff your way through. Either you understood the science or you did not. He called me a string of names that would get him kicked off most social media platforms. I hung up while he was mid-sentence. The phone sat there on the counter, dark and quiet. I stood in my kitchen drinking beer and thinking about Tyler in his corner office at the facility, surrounded by quarterly reports and marketing decks and lawyers who billed $400 an hour. None of them could solve his problem, because his problem was not legal or financial or strategic. His problem was that he had fired the only person who knew how to make the product work. I finished the beer and rinsed the bottle, then walked outside to the truck. I had prep work to do for tomorrow. 20 pounds of pork shoulder to season, and another batch of sauce to mix. The small batches I could make without industrial equipment, using the stabilizer I had kept for myself. The night was cold and clear, stars out, quiet except for some distant traffic noise. I unlocked the truck and climbed inside, flipping on the overhead lights. The space was cramped and worn, but it was mine. Every spatula, every knife, every square inch of counter space had been paid for with my own money and my own work. Nobody could take it from me. I pulled out the pork shoulder and started trimming it, methodical and precise. Each cut mattered, removing the excess fat without losing the marbling, scoring the surface to let the rub penetrate. The same attention to detail that I had learned in the lab, applied to meat and spice instead of compounds and catalysts. My phone buzzed. Another call from Tyler's number. I ignored it. He could call all night if he wanted. It would not change anything. The chemistry was what it was. The patents were what they were. And the market was already deciding what it thought of new old Smoky. I rubbed the pork shoulder with my spice blend, brown sugar, paprika, black pepper, garlic powder, a dozen other things in exact proportions that I had spent years perfecting. The meat glistened in the overhead light, red and white marbled fat, catching the fluorescent glow. This would cook for 14 hours, low and slow, until the connective tissue broke down and the fat rendered and the smoke penetrated every fiber, until you could pull it apart with a fork and it would melt on your tongue. You could not rush that. You could not cut corners. You could not hire a consultant to make it faster or cheaper. You just had to know what you were doing and then do it right. Tyler was learning that lesson the hard way. Linda was learning it. Every distributor who had pulled old Smoky from their shelves was learning it. The market was teaching them what my father had tried to teach me years ago. Quality is not an accident. It is a choice. And once you choose to abandon it, there is no going back. I finished prepping the shoulder and loaded it into the smoker. The hickory chips were already glowing, turning the inside of the box into a low inferno. I slid the meat in and closed the door, then checked the thermometer. 225 degrees. Perfect. By tomorrow afternoon, this would be something beautiful. Something that people would line up for. Something that would remind them what real barbecue tasted like. Something that old Smoky used to make back when people like me were still allowed in the building. My phone buzzed again. Text message this time. Tyler, all caps. Calling me every name he could think of. Telling me this was not over. I deleted the message without reading past the first line. Then I turned off my phone, locked up the truck, and went home to sleep. Tomorrow I had ribs to cook, people to feed, a business to run. Tyler could figure out his own problems. Chemistry does not care about your feelings. It does not care about your business plan or your profit margins or your venture capital. It just exists, immutable, constant, following laws that were old when the first human figured out how to make fire. You can work with it or you can fight it, but you cannot fool it. They were about to learn that the hard way. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, wearing the only suit I owned. It was the same suit I had worn at my father's funeral, and it still smelled faintly of the dry cleaner's chemicals. My lawyer sat next to me, a patent attorney named Rebecca-chan, who had reviewed my case for free after I explained the situation. She told me I had the most airtight intellectual property claim she had seen in 20 years. She also told me to let them attack first. Let them overextend. Let them commit to a position before we showed our hand. So I sat quietly and watched Linda and Tyler enter the courtroom with their legal team. They looked terrible. Linda had lost weight. Her expensive suit hung on her frame like it belonged to someone else. The perfect blonde hair that had always been shellacked into place now showed dark roots. Tyler walked beside her with his shoulders hunched, scrolling through his phone right up until the bailiff called the court to order. Their legal team was 3 attorneys from a firm in Nashville. Lead counsel was a man named Richard Voss, mid-50s, silver hair, and a tan that came from a salon. He carried himself like he had never lost a case and did not plan to start today. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Holland. I had looked her up, former patent examiner at the USPTO before going to law school. She knew chemistry. She knew intellectual property. And according to every legal blog I could find, she had no patience for corporate bullying. We were in the right place. Judge Holland took her seat and asked both parties to state their business. Voss stood up immediately, commanding the room like he owned it. He laid out their case in broad strokes. His client, Old Smoky Barbecue Company, was suing me for theft of trade secrets, corporate espionage, and tortious interference with business relationships. They were seeking $10 million in damages. The number hung in the air like smoke. $10 million from a guy running a food truck who could barely make rent. Voss walked the court through their narrative. I had been terminated for cause due to performance issues and resistance to necessary modernization. Following my termination, I had stolen proprietary formulas and deliberately sabotaged the company's production capabilities. The evidence, he claimed, was clear. Their product had failed immediately after my departure, and I had launched a competing business using their trade secrets. He said I was a disgruntled employee who had burned his bridges and now wanted to burn the company down with them. Judge Holland listened without expression. When Voss finished, she asked if he had documentation of the theft. Voss smiled. He presented emails I had sent from my company account, discussing formula modifications. He presented photos of my laboratory workspace. He presented testimony from current employees who swore I had been acting suspicious in my final weeks at the company. It was all circumstantial, all interpretation, but it sounded damning if you did not know the context. The judge turned to me. She asked if I had representation. Rebecca stood. She introduced herself and stated that we would be filing a counterclaim, but first we would like to address the plaintiff's accusations. Judge Holland nodded and told me I could speak. I stood up slowly. My hands were steady. I had been preparing for this moment for 4 months, playing out in my head while I scrubbed grills and mixed sauce. I knew exactly what I was going to say. I addressed the judge directly, ignoring Voss and his clients completely. I explained that I had not stolen anything. Every formula I had developed during my employment was created in the course of my duties and belonged to the company, as specified in my employment contract. I had never disputed that. Old Smoky owned the brand, the facility, the production equipment, and every recipe that bore the Old Smoky name. But they did not own everything. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside was a patent document, filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office 12 years earlier. I handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Holland. The room was absolutely silent. I could hear the air conditioning cycling on. I could hear Tyler shifting in his seat. I told the judge that the document was a patent for a proprietary stabilizing compound, designated as stabilizing extract number 4. The patent was filed under my name as the sole inventor. It covered a specific formulation using fermented pepper extract, enzymatically modified starches, and a proprietary blend of organic acids. Without this compound, barbecue sauce made with natural ingredients would separate, oxidize, and spoil rapidly. With it, the sauce remained stable for 18 months without refrigeration while maintaining optimal flavor and texture. Old Smoky had been using this compound under a licensing agreement, $1 per year. The agreement was co-signed by my father and me when I was 26 years old. The license expired automatically upon termination of my employment. Judge Holland was reading the patent document. I watched her eyes move down the page, taking in the technical specifications, the claims, the filing dates. She looked up at me and asked if the company had been informed of this licensing arrangement. I told her yes. My father had kept copies of the agreement in the company files. It was renewed annually at the board meetings. Linda had been present for at least 3 of those renewals. The judge turned to Voss. She asked if he was aware of this patent. The color had drained from Voss's face. He looked like a man who had just realized he had walked into a trap. He stammered that his clients had not made him aware of any such licensing agreement. He requested a recess to consult with them. Judge Holland denied the request. She told him to proceed with his case or sit down. Voss sat down. I continued. I explained to the judge that when Old Smoky terminated my employment, they lost access to stabilizing extract number 4. The natural consequence was product failure. The sauce separated. The flavor degraded. Bottles fermented and exploded on store shelves. This was not sabotage. This was chemistry. They had tried to reformulate without the stabilizer, using cheaper alternatives. Modified food starch, caramel coloring, commercial emulsifiers. But these substitutes changed the flavor profile and failed to prevent oxidation. The product they released was inferior, and the market responded accordingly. I had not stolen anything. I had not sabotaged anything. I had simply stopped giving them access to something they never owned in the first place. Rebecca stood up then. She handed the judge our counterclaim. We were suing Old Smoky Barbecue Company for patent infringement. They had continued to produce and sell barbecue sauce for 3 months after my termination, using a formulation that required stabilizing extract number 4, without a valid license. Every bottle they produced was a violation of my patent. We were seeking damages, penalties, and an immediate injunction preventing them from producing any barbecue sauce until they either licensed a compound or reformulated without it. The silence in the courtroom was profound. Dead air. No coughing, no shuffling, no whispers. I looked at Linda for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her face had gone completely white. She was gripping the table in front of her, knuckles bloodless. Next to her, Tyler was staring at the patent document like it was written in a foreign language. Their attorney was reading our counterclaim, and I could see the moment he understood what had happened. His shoulders sagged. He set the papers down and leaned over to whisper something to Linda. She shook her head violently. Tyler tried to say something, but his voice cracked. Judge Holland asked Voss if he had anything to add. Voss stood up again. He looked like he had aged 5 years in 5 minutes. He requested a continuance to allow his clients to review the patent documentation and consult with technical experts. Judge Holland looked at him over her reading glasses. She asked him how his clients could be unaware of a patent that they had been licensing for 12 years. Voss had no answer. The judge made her ruling from the bench. She dismissed Old Smoky's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning they could not refile. She accepted our counterclaim and ordered an immediate audit of Old Smoky's production records to determine the extent of the patent infringement. She also issued a preliminary injunction. Old Smoky was prohibited from manufacturing or selling any barbecue sauce containing tomato-based formulations until the patent dispute was resolved. The gavel came down. One sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. Tyler put his head in his hands. Linda just stared straight ahead, unmoving. Voss gathered his papers in silence. I stood up, shook Rebecca's hand, and walked out courtroom. I did not look back. There was nothing left to say. The law had spoken. Chemistry had spoken. And they had no defense against either. The audit took 6 weeks. During that time, I kept running my food truck. The line got longer. People had heard about the lawsuit through the local news. I became a minor celebrity. The guy who took down the corporation that screwed him. Very American story. Everyone loves an underdog. The audit results were damning. Old Smoky had produced and sold over 40,000 units of barbecue sauce after my termination, all using a formula that required the stabilized compound. At wholesale prices, that was nearly $600,000 in revenue. Under patent law, I was entitled to damages. The court awarded me 3 times the revenue, $1.8 million, plus legal fees, plus the cost of the product recalls that were now mandatory. Old Smoky did not have that kind of money. The stock price had collapsed. Distributors had pulled their contracts. The company had spent hundreds of thousands fighting the lawsuit and trying to reformulate. 2 weeks after the judgment, they filed for bankruptcy. The bankruptcy auction was held on a Tuesday morning in April. I drove the facility in my old pickup, the same truck I had driven away in 4 months earlier. The parking lot was nearly empty. A few bankruptcy attorneys, a liquidator, and a handful of industrial equipment dealers looking to scavenge cheap machinery. The auctioneer was a tired-looking man in a cheap suit who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. He stood on a makeshift platform in the loading dock and read through the lots. Production equipment, office furniture, inventory, the building itself, the land, the Old Smoky trademark and brand assets. Nobody bid on the brand. It was toxic now, worthless. The equipment drew some interest from the dealers, but when the auctioneer explained that the production line was incomplete without proprietary compounds covered by third-party patents, even they backed off. You could not make barbecue sauce in that facility without the stabilizer, and only one person had the stabilizer. I waited through 45 minutes of half-hearted bidding. Finally, the auctioneer reached the last lot. Complete facility purchase. Building, land, equipment, inventory, brand rights, everything as a package deal. Opening bid was set at $200,000, less than the value of the land alone. Nobody bid. The auctioneer lowered it to $100,000. Still nothing. The dealers were already leaving. I raised my hand. I bid $50,000. The auctioneer looked at me like I had just offered him a live grenade. He asked if I was serious. I told him I was. He asked if I had proof of funds. I showed him a cashier's check from the bank, drawn on the settlement money old Smoky had paid me. Going once. Going twice. Sold. I owned it all. The facility. The equipment. The brand that had been my father's life work. I bought it for less than the cost of a new pickup truck. The irony was not lost on me. I signed the paperwork in the bankruptcy attorney's office. Linda and Tyler were required to be present for the transfer of the property deed. They sat on the opposite side of the conference table, both looking like they had not slept in weeks. Linda tried to speak to me while the attorney was making copies. She said we were still family, that she had made mistakes, but she had cared about my father, that maybe we could work something out. I did not respond. I just watched the attorney collate documents. Tyler was quieter. He did not make eye contact. He just sat there with his hands folded on the table, staring at nothing. When the paperwork was finished, I took my copies and left. I did not say goodbye. There was nothing to say to them. I drove to the facility that afternoon with the deed in my glove compartment. The gate was chained, but I had the keys now. Everything that had been theirs was mine. I unlocked the chain and drove through, then closed the gate behind me. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just changed. For months of running a food truck had given me a different perspective. I did not need a factory this size. I did not need industrial equipment or 50 employees. But I wanted it anyway. Not for revenge. Not anymore. For something else. Something harder to name. I walked across the empty parking lot to the main entrance. The old Smoky sign was still there, faded and dirty. I would have to decide what to do with that. Keep it for nostalgia or tear it down and start fresh. Problems for later. Inside, the facility was quiet. The production floor was dark, the vats empty and cleaned out. The office area was stripped. Linda and Tyler had taken everything personal. They had left behind desks, chairs, computers, the bones of a business. I walked through the halls, checking each room. The break room where I had eaten lunch with my father 1,000 times. The conference room where we had planned expansions and celebrated victories. The loading dock where trucks had lined up to take our product across 3 states. All empty now. All silent. I made my way to the laboratory. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The late afternoon sun was streaming to the tall windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. The lab benches were bare. The equipment was still there. Scales, pH meters, refractometers, but unplugged and unused. This was where I had learned chemistry from my father, where I had spent 15 years chasing perfection, where I had developed stabilizing extract number 4 in a mason jar at 3 a.m, because I could not sleep until I solved the problem. I walked to the main bench and set down my bag. From inside, I pulled out the small glass jar. The same jar I had taken on the day they fired me. 4 ounces of dark brown liquid. The key to everything. I placed it on the bench and stepped back. The circle was complete. I stood there in the silence, looking at that jar, and I felt something I had not felt in months. Not satisfaction exactly. Not revenge. Something quieter. Something like peace. They had tried to take this from me. They had thought the business was the building and the brand name and the market share. They had thought they could fire the craftsman and keep the craft. But craft is not a thing you own. It is a thing you know. It lives in your hands, in your head, and your understanding of how elements combine and transform. You cannot steal it. You cannot buy it. You cannot fake it. You either have it or you do not. Linda and Tyler did not have it. They never did, and now they had nothing. I walked over to the ventilation system and flipped the switch. The fans kicked on with a low hum, pulling air through the building. Within seconds, I could smell it. The ghost of 30 years of production. Smoked peppers, vinegar, spices. The scent was faint but unmistakable. It smelled like home. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. I told him I had a proposition for him. I had just acquired a facility, and I needed someone to help me run production. The pay would not be great at first, but we would be making something real, something that mattered. He did not even ask how much. He just asked when he could start. Over the next week, I called 6 more people, all of them former old Smoky employees who had been laid off during Linda and Tyler's cost-cutting. A production manager, 2 line workers, a logistics coordinator, people who knew the craft, people who cared about quality. Every single one of them said yes. We started small, 1 production run per week. Small batch, using my formula, using stabilizing extract number 4. The real stuff, no shortcuts, no compromises. The first bottles came off the line 3 weeks after I bought the facility. I held one up to the light and looked at the consistency. Perfect, uniform, no separation. I opened it and smelled it, smoke and spice and thyme. I tasted it. It was exactly right. We did not call it Old Smoky. That brand was dead. I filed paperwork to trademark a new name, Smoke and Steel. Same name as my food truck. Same philosophy. Quality over everything. The first distributor who had dropped Old Smoky called me within a month. He had heard I was back in production. He wanted to place an order. I told him I would think about it. He called back the next day and doubled his initial offer. I accepted. Within 3 months, we were running 2 production shifts. Within 6 months, we were profitable. The food blogs that had trashed New Old Smoky were now writing features about the resurrection of small batch craft barbecue sauce. People who remembered the original product were buying cases. We were not trying to be big. We were trying to be good. And good was enough. I kept the food truck running on weekends. It was not about the money anymore. It was about staying connected to craft, about remembering where I came from, about never forgetting that quality is built 1 plate at a time. Marcus ran the facility during the week. I split my time between the lab and the truck. It was exhausting. It was exactly what I wanted. One Saturday afternoon, almost a year after I bought the facility, a familiar BMW pulled into the parking lot where I had the truck set up. I watched Tyler get out and walk over the window. He looked different, older, thinner. He was wearing jeans and a regular shirt. No suit, no expensive watch. He asked if he could talk to me. I told him I was busy. He said he understood. He said he just wanted to apologize. He said he had been an idiot, that he had thought business was about numbers and margins and growth, and he had learned the hard way that some things could not be measured in spreadsheets. He said Linda had moved back to Atlanta. They had lost everything. He was working in marketing for a chain restaurant now, making $40,000 a year, living in an apartment with roommates. He asked if there was any way I might consider hiring him. He said he had learned his lesson, that he would work any position, that he just wanted a chance to be part of something real again. I looked at him standing there, waiting for my answer. Part of me felt something like pity. He looked broken, humbled, maybe even genuine. But I remembered the funeral, the will reading, the day he escorted me out like a criminal, the way he had laughed when he told me I smelled like the past. I told him no. I told him I did not have a marketing department. I told him I did not need one. What I had was a product that spoke for itself. What I needed were people who understood that quality was not a marketing angle. It was a way of life. I told him there was no place for him here. He nodded slowly. He did not argue. He just said he understood and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, and I did not feel bad about it. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. That evening, after I closed up the truck, I drove to the facility. The night shift was running. I could hear the hum of the equipment through the walls. I unlocked the lab and went inside, turning on just a desk lamp. The small glass jar was still on the shelf where I kept it. I picked it up and held it to the light. Nearly empty now. I had used most of it in the first production runs, teaching the new team how to incorporate it properly. Now, we made it in larger batches, following the protocol I had developed years ago. But I kept this one, the original, a reminder. I set it back on the shelf and looked around the lab. Tomorrow I would be here at 6 a.m., starting a new formulation, a spicy variant, something with habanero and lime, an experiment. Maybe it would work. Maybe it would not. That was the beauty of chemistry. You could fail 100 times and still get up to try again. Outside the window, the Tennessee hills were dark against the purple sky. Somewhere out there, Linda and Tyler were living with their choices. Somewhere out there, people were opening bottles of smoke and steel and tasting something real. And in this lab, in this building that had almost been lost, the work continued. My father used to say that the best revenge was not destroying your enemies. It was outlasting them, building something so good, so true, that it made their sabotage irrelevant. He was right. I did not destroy old Smoky. They destroyed themselves. I just refused to die with it. And now, standing in the lab where it all began, I understood something I had not understood before. This was never about revenge. It was about respect. Respect for the craft. Respect for the process. Respect for the idea that some things are worth doing right, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. I turned off the light and locked the lab. The night air was cool and clean. Stars were coming out. Tomorrow would be another day of work. Another day of mixing and measuring and tasting. Another day of trying to make something perfect. I drove home with the windows down, letting the spring air rush through the truck. The radio was playing something old, something my father used to listen to. I turned it up. The road stretched ahead, dark and familiar. I knew every curve, every pothole. I had driven this route 1,000 times, and I would drive it 1,000 more, because this was not the end of something. It was the beginning, and the best part about beginnings is that you get to decide what they become. I chose quality. I chose craft. I chose to build instead of destroy. And in the end, that made all the difference.